Hailing back from the days of Medarot 7, this rather strange design has a pure emphasis on support-based skills exclusively. It is CHA01 Saishou Gunshi, with the kit of field control, mobile boost, guard boost, float legs, and the leg ability of extra magazine, which grants an additional head use, and in addition will buff the base stats of the head, primarily heat and cool, when using it. Now, as a model that was available a fair bit of time ago as an event reward, Saishou Gunshi is a model that has come and gone, unfortunately, with no real definition or sign of a return since at time of recording. But for those that have snagged him, this model may, at first glance and originally when he released, may not have been super handy at the beginning, but thanks to a lot of major buffs as of the 3.2 patch, has become an incredibly invaluable ally, especially when modifiers require you to make use of support skills. Field control on the head is a support skill that, upon being activated, will change himself and all allies' leg type to A rank, and in addition will cap out their heavy limit for the duration of the effect. This means that even though it may not be super useful to him as a float-legged model, this does mean to any allies that he might be paired with, can most certainly capitalize on making use of whatever legs or builds they had going with, without having to worry too much about terrain. Very similarly to another buff, which is basically this 2.0, which would be Dominion, which does the same thing with a couple added buffs as well. Mobile Boost on the right arm is another support skill that, once activated, will buff the base mobility of himself and all allies by 50%, which means that while the buff is active, everyone will be going progressively and very noticeably faster than they ever were before, making it much easier for not just him, but also any allies that are on the field to easily outrun even the speedier foes on the enemy side. Left arm of guard boost is yet another support skill that, once activated, will buff the resist stats of his legs and all allies' legs by about 50%. This means that while this buff in particular is active, and himself and all allies will be taking considerably less damage, to the point that they'll have boosted resistance stats to keep themselves alive longer on the field and keep incoming damage as low as possible. Float legs means that he will have relatively good coverage across all terrains as expected of a float leg at A rank across the board, and of course S rank on Cyber, which everybody gets. And its stats across the board, even for a support type, are actually far above a good tier, as a model that can most certainly take a hit and keep on kicking. His head's packing about 3600 HP, his right arm and left arm packing about 3250, and his legs at 3600. Very healthy HP pool for a support buffer such as himself, which means he can most certainly take a hit moderately well without it crippling him too easily. The heat and cool stats, which is honestly something very important to emphasize on with support skills, is also very nice too. His head packing within the range of high 900s to mid thousands, which means he can activate that buff quickly, and his arms packing between mid 600s even to low mid 800s in terms of their heat and cool stats, which means he most certainly will not have any issues running to and from the center line to keep these buffs active. Plus, as another benefit in Saishou Gunshi's case, all three buffs do not overwrite each other, which means you can have mobile boost, guard boost, and field control all up at the same time and maximize the absolute use of himself or all allies that are getting that bonus. His leg stats are honestly not too shabby, kind of to be expected of a float-legged, much like him, a mid-range to a point. A mobility of 771 is actually very good, and he's one of the few float legs that are not a boss type that are most certainly worth raising if you did manage to snag him. An evade of 1115 isn't too shabby either, as it means he most certainly will be able to dodge or graze moderately well, depending on the attack. A melee and shoot resist at 693 even per stat sadly is not great, but again, that also is the base stats before anything else is applied. If you are able to apply the guard boost effect to self, that most certainly will buff these even higher. Plus any terrain bonuses that he manages to snag as on top of that will most certainly kind of round that out just a little bit more and keep him more tanky and easier to survive on the field. Plus, it is also worth noting that his legs can support up to 2 heavy parts, despite the fact that he himself does not have any packed on him. All this being said, as a pure set score, I still do have to rate Saishou Gunshi a pretty solid 6.5 out of 10. That's not particularly to say that he's a bad or a mid-range model, but being a very strictly support-based model, his viability on the field can be kind of hit and miss depending on how you use him. I did mention that field control, mobile boost, and guard boost all can stack on top of each other, which means he can be put to very good use. But once he activates once he activates all three of those, he's just kind of there. All you could really do with him from there going forward is essentially use him just as a metaphor spammer, whether that be for a team nuke or even just for a support skill that he can add to the allied team. Plus, field control is a nice skill to have, albeit niche, but pairing that with an extra magazine, which gives him an extra head use, kind of defeats the purpose, unless someone is using buff trap or effect clear to remove them and he has to constantly reapply them. Extra magazine is unfortunately kind of wasted with him. As mixed parts though, I do very easily have to rate him a 7.5 out of 10, because even though by himself his versatility is good, aside from maybe the leg ability, if you were to mix him up, you can most certainly capitalize on these as well, depending on how you choose to use him. And his legs especially will be a huge MVP part to make use of and capitalize on, because even though the stats by themselves may not be super high in terms of those resist stats, once he gets some bonuses activated on the field, this can relatively easily fix itself in almost no time flat.